Hello, welcome to Behind the Confident Smile. I'm your host, Bianca Cotton, and today we are talking about breast cancer and surviving breast cancer and the journey of uncovering what it's like to live with it for a moment in time with special guest Ramona Burress. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Bianca.
A pleasure.
Yes, looking forward to the conversation. Honest conversation.
Oh, definitely. So before we get to how you discovered you had breast cancer, let's go back a couple of steps. Okay. When did you learn what breast cancer was?
That is a good question. Let's take it back to 1995. I'm joking.
I was going to say, okay. Right. Elementary school, high school.
High school. Year I graduated. But for me, breast cancer was always pink ribbons. Because that's, what we saw all over media, TV, billboards, every October, Breast Cancer Awareness Month. I'd never had anyone in my family or in my close circle who I knew had been impacted by breast cancer. So it was just one of those, pink ribbons for this, blue ribbons for that. I knew that, there were some men who had breast cancer because you think about Richard Roundtree and now more recently Beyonce's dad. So I just knew basics like, it's just cancer that originates in the breast. And that was pretty much it.
Wow. Yeah. Did you ever learn about it in high school? Like in a health class? Did they talk about it?
Yeah, we learned about it from more of a epidemiology, like stats of how many people in America have breast cancer. We never really saw the stats when it comes to like people of color or, breaking it down by race and ethnicity. But it was just like, this percentage of the population has a likelihood of having breast cancer. This percentage has a likelihood of prostate cancer. So it was pretty much lumped all together with all the other more prominent cancers and discuss more in that numbers perspective and, just basic information about what cancer is, just a cell that kind of just goes rogue. And instead of going through cell death or what we call apoptosis, it begins to mutate and forms a cancer. So that was pretty much, just a generic definition that I'd had about cancer.
Interesting. Like no personal touch to it at all?
No. I mean, I'm a pharmacist, so when I was in pharmacy school and even probably in undergrad, taking some of the biology classes, we talked about therapeutic options, but never really enough about the disease itself, just how to treat it.
Interesting. We got some work to do on that.
Yes.
So with all of your learning, and you are dropping terminology, so feel free to tell the people what you do.
Let's see. What do
put this in context.
So I always laugh and tell people, I'm like, I'm a drug dealer. Yes, I'm a drug dealer, folks, but a legal one. So I'm a pharmacist by training, infectious disease and oncology certified. I've worked for many years behind the counter in some of our neighborhood community retail stores, but I transitioned recently into the world of pharma, so the folks who make the drugs. Never thought that I would be in that space from a profession, but I do have to say that my own personal healthcare journey and being an advocate and being a voice and really trying to affect change, that's what allowed my career to move from retail on the corner of happy and healthy to...
We know that slogan.
Yes, to, some of the big wigs, out there in pharma who actually make the drugs.
Wow. Yeah. But this makes for a very interesting health journey because you're on that side. So when did you discover you had something going on in your body that maybe you didn't have a name for at that moment?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I was about 34, so maybe 2013, and was just taking a shower, lathering up, and I felt a little knot in my breast, in my left breast, a lump. And to be honest with you, I was like, okay, just kind of ignored it because often throughout my life, I would have like lumps here and there in my breast that were like cyclical with my menstrual cycle. So, they would kind of come up and then they go away. And that had been happening since I was like 15, 14. And so I was like, okay, here's another one. And I kind of like just told myself I'll watch and wait. Never had any concerns, right? Because I don't have any family history of cancer or anything. But that lump stayed there for a little bit longer. And it started to become a little bit painful because I'm left-handed. And at that time in life, I was separating from my husband and was trying to, be that type A career professional to ascend up that ladder. And so that too, I believe, kind of contributed to the length of time that I ignored it. And that's just my honest, truth, because, sometimes we're so busy taking care of other folks and trying to be the perfect this or that we don't do that self-care.
With the S on our chest,
with
right?
the S on our chest.
Super mom, super woman,
And yes,
super wife.
Yes, and this is not an ode to the strong Black woman, because there's a problem with that. There's something wrong with that we, be forced to have those titles, right? So I had, moved out the house from my husband and, was trying to keep the kids, together. I have 3 children. And at the time, I have a set of twins. They were probably 8 at the time. And then their older sister was maybe 13 or so. So, because I broke up the Hustables. I had tried so hard, but I broke us up. So I was just trying to make sure they were straight. Again, trying to show up well on the professional side. But once that lump was consistently painful, I was like, okay, darn, let me call my doctor. And so that may have been like November of 2013. So I called her, in great relationship with this doctor. She's still my primary care doctor to this day. But I called her, I was like, yeah, I got this knot and it's hurting. It's hard for me to count these pills at work, and I can't type and I can't pick up the phone and multitask. And she was like, well, girl, I just saw you in July. I don't think it's anything. Let's just wait. Now, mind you guys, like, I never was blessed with boobs. All my life, all I had wanted was a rack. My mama got a rack. Everybody in the family got a rack. I was, olive oil. I'm like, come on, God, why? So it wasn't that hard for me to kind of, 1, feel the lump, but 2, for it to kind of impede, how I was conducting my daily activities. And so first phone call with the doctor, okay, cool. About 2 weeks later, it was getting a little bit more painful and increased the size just a little bit. So I called her back and she was like, Ramona, you're going through so much right now. I don't want you to, make a mountain out of a molehill. Just, when I saw you in July, we were good. There was no concern. So let's just see. You have a history of these things coming with your cycle. Let's just see. And then a week later, I called her back. I was like, look, I got to come in. And again, it was painful, but I have a high pain tolerance because we're the strong Black woman, right? But I was like,
we can take it.
We can take it. But
at least we think so.
Yes. But, my ancestors, the spirits, something was telling me, this pain has just been here for too long. So I called it a third time. I was like, look, I got to get in. And so I was finally able to get in to see just my primary care. So I wasn't able to see her, but I saw someone in her practice. And what's troubling about that is that I appreciate the fact that she knew what was going on in my outside life. But again, as a clinician, when a patient calls and has a complaint, they're supposed to be seen. Right. So did some of that kind of seep into why it took 3 times for me to call, for me to get in? Who knows? Was it because I'm a Black woman in this large, healthcare institution that maybe my voice wasn't important enough to be seen because, she didn't have any availability? I don't know. But and her and I, we tried to have conversations about it because, again, she's still my doctor to this day. But it's just, some of the realities of the biasness of how we move that, impacts, the health of people that look like us. And, clinically and professionally as a pharmacist, I grew up in the HIV space. And I grew up in the times where new medications were coming out that had horrible side effects. Patients were taking cocktails, like 12 pills a day to control their HIV, where if I look at a patient and say, hey, why aren't you taking your pills? I really had to say, does this patient have housing? Do they even have transportation to come to the doctor's office or to pick up their medicine from, the pharmacy? What are these other barriers that are spilling over into what I'm seeing from a medication adherence or even from an outcomes, positive health outcomes from them that maybe we can help address to make them better? And so I pride myself that I became a better pharmacist because I became a social worker. The more that I, identified gaps and provided resources to help there, the better patients were when it came to their health. So I was a champion on that side, but it's interestingly enough, when I was going through my own journey, I kind of got stripped away of some of that champion strength that I had as a clinician. So when I finally had the primary care appointment, not seeing my regular doctor, but someone in her practice, I can remember she was touching me and she was like, I don't think it's anything, but because you have a private insurance. She named the insurance. I won't name it on this conversation. But because you have that insurance, I'm going to go ahead and send you for a mammogram. And so,
But
again,
what if you didn't have that insurance? Then what?
Ramona had Medicaid? What if Ramona had Medicare or, government payer insurance? And I get it somewhat because, clinically the guidelines tell us if a woman is under the age of 40, you go this route, right? Which would mean mammogram would not be part of my next steps because I didn't have a family history. I didn't have any of the identifiable risk factors that we associate with breast cancer. But what we're seeing is that for Black and brown women, we're having breast cancer without that connections, without those, that lineage or genetic perspective. We're having it younger. We're having it more aggressively. Because going back to when you asked, what did I know about breast cancer? To be honest with you, I always thought it was white women. Because those commercials, those billboards with the pink ribbons, it was all menopausal white women.
Right.
That was some upper echelon stuff. Ramona from, Park
You
Manor.
didn't see yourself in it.
Right. That wasn't me. So 30 years later, when I'm going through this diagnostic journey or what have you, it still was kind of like foreign to me. But thank goodness I had good insurance. Yay.
Right.
Because when I got that mammogram, of course, it prompted next steps for an ultrasound to get a better imaging of the lump because it was more than one that was seen on the mammogram. And that led to a biopsy where they actually took a needle and aspirated some of the fluid from the lumps to see if they had cancer cells. And of course, they did. But again, what if I had stopped
advocating for yourself?
Yeah. Or what if that doctor would have denied me access to that mammogram if I'd had a different insurance?
Right.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure happens a lot.
And thank goodness, the state of Illinois, I'm thankful that we have great leaders who understand that this is happening because my story is not uncommon. I hear a lot of women who go through that. I had to push to be heard. I had to push to be diagnosed. So now, women have access to mammograms. Because of some of the legislature that's been passed in the state and some of the big advocacy groups who've been pushing for that. But if we go across the border, that may not be the same for someone who lives in Wisconsin or someone who lives in Indiana. So we have to give thanks for, the legislator that we were able to pass here for women to have access to these screening modalities. Because sometimes, more often than not, when women go to have mammograms, it's not going to be positive for cancer. Again, women of color, we have denser, more fibrocystic breasts. So sometimes you'll have a lump and it'll be benign or non-cancerous. So it's very common. And so it makes me think, sometimes is the issue of why we restrict mammograms, is it because that so many of them are not cancer? And you think about the costs associated with having a mammogram to the health system.
Prevention.
Right. But it's still you're still catching women who are walking around with cancer in their body, even though they may be on the lesser side of the percentage breakdown of, what are the outcomes from these mammograms that we're giving. So again, more of a systems issue. But when I think about, the costs, I'm like, maybe that's what the driver is of why, we say 40 is the age, or you got to have 5 out of these 7 things before we can even allow you to get a mammogram screening. So again, kudos to our state for looking at it from a different perspective, not the monetary perspective.
Definitely. It's like life or money. Which one weighs more?
Which one?
So after you pushed for the mammogram, got the results back that you did have breast cancer, what occurred next?
Yeah, so even getting those results was weird. So I remember my mom went with me for the mammogram and the ultrasound and the biopsy, and we were kind of just like, okay, what's happening? And interestingly enough, I always say that the influence of media, the influence of celebrities. So at that time, Angelina Jolie was going through her journey. She wasn't ever diagnosed with cancer, but I think either her mom or her sister, someone had it, and she was known to have carried this genetic trait that we know is associated with cancer or breast cancer, the BRCA gene. And so she elected to have a double mastectomy prophylactically.
I remember that.
Remember that, right?
Yes.
All over TV again. And I'm a scientist. I'm a clinician. I went to school, right? But what am I driving? What am I making my decisions based off of? A celebrity, and she ain't even black. But anywho, but I remember her journey, and how she went through the double mastectomy. I think she may have had a hysterectomy too. just again to reduce her risk. So when I got that phone call that my results from my biopsy was indeed cancer, because they'll ask you like, okay, you want a phone call? You want to come in? I'm like, I ain't taking no time off of work, so you going to call me. And so I remember getting it one night. I had just gotten back in from work, picked up the kids from school, was trying to make dinner, was trying to do something other than chicken nuggets, right, for dinner. Trying to be a real
I mean, that's real.
And I got that call, and I remember going back to my bedroom so I could talk in private so the kids wouldn't hear. And the doctor's like, yeah, it looks like it's stage 1. It could be stage 2. We probably won't find out till we go in and do some surgery. But, I do want to let you know that it did come back positive for cancer. So how are you feeling? And I was like, well, am I going to die? And he's like, no. I was like, okay, we're cool. I was like, am I going to get some new boobs? He's like, yeah. I was like, okay, fine. What's the next step? So that was how I took it. And I'm so horrible because I'm the one that makes a joke when stuff ain't funny. And that's my coping mechanism.
Comic relief.
Yes, yes. And so instead of really dealing with the diagnosis, I think I laughed a lot. I probably drank too much Kettle One, but that was what got me through. Now that I can look back years later, I was like, yeah, I was laughing. This stuff wasn't even funny, but it helped me at the time. Right, because there was so much else going on. So yeah, I elected to have the double mastectomy, even though the cancer was in one breast, so I can get my new implants, right? Because I'm out here in the market now. I got to find husband number 2, right? Still ain't.
And you always want to,
and I always want it, right? And that's going to be another piece of the story later, but. Yeah, and so we decided what my chemo regimen was going to be, whether or not I needed radiation. So we're going into the Christmas season at this point. And so I'm just trying to, keep a straight face with the kids because, again, broken home now, daddy going to come over afterwards and, all this stuff. So I elected to have my double mastectomy and start my chemo and stuff February of that next year. So that would be 2014. And, felt good about it. At work, I knew I was going to take, maybe 12 weeks off and I, could still be a badass, professionally, because that 12 weeks wasn't going to hurt me, and all that good stuff. But interestingly enough, my employer at the time, they switched our healthcare benefits the year of 2014. So traditionally, we would get every January, every start of a new calendar year, we would get all of our sick days, our vacation days just dropped into the system. And of course, 2014, they moved to a PTO or an accrual system where you get a certain number of days per pay period, per month, what have you. So as I exited 2013, that year, I had essentially tapped out all of my days, going back and forth with diagnostic for this, or maybe taking off days for the kids when somebody had an ear infection, or that type of stuff. So I moved into 2014 with no cushion, and it gave me pause because again, going through a divorce, I had moved into Hyde Park, into a space that I could afford, but I was stretching it, because when you break up a relationship, you got to be like, I'm better without you, all that stuff. So I'm like,
put up the front.
Right. Not living beyond my means, but living close to, that edge. So I was thinking about, okay, well, I got this money over here, and if I don't get paid and so, but all that factored in as I was prepping for, my cancer surgery and treatment for February. And so overall, the double mastectomy surgery went fine. When you have a mastectomy, if you choose to get reconstructive surgery, what they do is, with the mastectomy, they take out all the tissue that is breast tissue. Some women can have lumpectomies if their cancer is small and isolated enough, where they'll essentially just carve a piece of tissue out of your breast. And so you may have just again, a lump removed, which is why it's a lumpectomy. But because my cancer was in multiple spots, it meant having a mastectomy where you're removing all the inner tissue.
Right.
And so I elected to have that done on the right side, even though there was no cancer. But because I was young, there was a greater risk of recurrence. And so you reduce that risk if you just go ahead and scrape out, the tissue that remains. And so interestingly enough, when I was prepping for surgery, because again, guys, I didn't have any boobs. So one of my cancer tumors or lumps or whatever was very close to the nipple on my left side. And so they were like, your nipple has to go. And I'm like, damn, I ain't gonna have no nipple. Okay. But they was like, they were like, we could tattoo you one, right? So we could tattoo you
wow.
an areola, and we could take a flap of skin and give you, a reconstructed nipple. Okay, fine.
Okay, fancy.
So this side, remember, the right side didn't have any cancer. So they were like, well, we're going to take this nipple. And like, no, why can't I keep my nipple, right?
Wow.
So I actually had to fight with the surgeon about keeping my nipple.
What a conversation.
But this is the reality of like, I should be thinking about cancer. I should be thinking about,
Right.
whether I'm going to be able to survive and, what are my kids? Is my will done and all that? And I got, argue about saving my nipple. So I won that fight. I still got my nipple here. But the fact that was part of the journey.
Right.
Like,
and along this journey, who was supporting you?
So I have to give thanks to my mom. She was definitely there. That's my ride or die. And really my kids. And sometimes I have shame in when I talk about the role they played in this, because I had shame that I was going through a divorce, and then the shame of some of the financial stuff that happened because of not having good benefits, not having enough of a nest egg, but the shame too of them being strong for me. Even in a recovery period. So when I went through the surgery, they scrape everything out, but they put these expanders. So it's kind of like a balloon, if you can imagine a balloon, but with a hard plastic back. They insert that into your breast. And then slowly, like every week, they'll pump air so that, they inflate you back to whatever your normal size was, or, your desired size if you can get there. But it's not done all at once, because there's a risk of having necrosis or skin tissue death if they do too much too soon. So, imagine having these balloons, but also with the balloons, there are drains, because when they remove all the tissue, there's like lymphatic fluid and all the stuff that comes out of your breast, the remaining from the surgery. And so a tube, coming out from the top, a tube coming out from the bottom on both sides, and they're all collected in a drainage bowl that you have to, it's kind of like, when the blood pressure cuff, when you have to, you see the doctor squeeze it. So that's your collection bulb, and it has to be drained a couple times a day with all the fluid and blood that's running from your scars as you're healing. And so, again, I'm the clinician, I'm the adult. I could not drain my bulbs. I could not look at the stuff that was coming out of my body, the excrements or whatever. So my kids, but particularly my son, who was 8 at the time, he was draining my bulbs.
Wow.
And so the fact that here I am, I'm a punk, right? And I'm relying on my kids.
You just needed support.
I know. But I went to school. I shouldn't be squeamish when it comes to stuff like that. But I was. And so, yeah, my kids really stood up. And so, that's one example of, him draining my bulbs. And I'm like, darn, like, I have guilt for that. I'm thankful that he stood up, and he was a man at the age of 8 to drain my bulbs. But but hopefully it's taught them resilience in that space. But they were definitely my core supporters, but also my network, my sister girl network. Folks who came through with food, folks who came through, to give me a laugh, take me outside. It definitely does take a village when, we're going through journeys like this, just like it takes a village for, raising our kids as well, too. So I'm thankful. And all the ancillary folks, out there as well, too. So I can't say that I was in this fight alone, but at the end of the day, it was still very much so isolating.
What made it isolating for you?
If I think about it now, years removed, it was the shame that came with, so much of the outer parts of the cancer that, I didn't feel good disclosing to folks that, I didn't have any food in the house for the kids. Because, I'm a pharmacist. I make good money. And could it have been that I should have planned better? Were there some things I could have done differently? Was I living too close to my means, above my means? So again, all the fear of the collapse of things that happened secondary to the cancer, I think kind of made me go into like this little hole to kind of, not share and not be truthful. And that's why now I love having these conversations, because I want to break women from the chains of that.
Yeah, of suffering in silence, of feeling as though we need to maintain the face, maintain the smile right behind the confident smile.
Yeah.
It's like, no, if you're really struggling, let's figure out how to help you. And Ramona, your story is so impactful. I remember us talking prior to this, and I was like, oh, I can't wait to talk to her.